All right, welcome to 5.3 solving polynomial equations. All right, and we're probably on about day 2 of this. And the big picture of what we're actually doing is we are working on exponents with 3 or greater. Right, so you have like 3 answers or 4 answers or something like that. And the big idea is we want to factor it apart. So you want to take something in the x cubed or x to the fourth world and break it into linear and quadratic pieces, because then we already know how to solve those. Right, if we can get it to linear, we can just do our algebra steps and solve it. If we can get it to an x squared quadratic, then we can solve it with any of these methods: quad formula, graph it, maybe a factor some more. Okay, so just as an example, here's an x cubed one, which we're going to learn about actually tomorrow, but it'll factor into this linear part and this quadratic part, right? And then once we got the linear part, we're in good shape there. We just set it equal to 0, and then from there we can pretty much figure out that our one answer for x will be 4, right? We've done that a bunch, and then this other part will actually have 2 more answers, and if we use a quad formula there, it won't actually factor, but if you use quad formula, we'll be able to get the 2 more answers to that quadratic. Okay, so the huge part of this lesson is being able to factor. Like, this factoring down here is pretty tricky. We'll actually learn that tomorrow. But the factoring we're going to do today is just slightly different. All right, so this whole section, this is kind of a summary slide of what's going on, where our big goal is to be able to solve using factoring, and we just have to use new factoring techniques. All right, so I kind of made this slide as like a general thing to kind of help you what to look for. The first of which is the idea that always look for a GCF. All right, so that's always where we should start. And then after that, there's all these different things that can happen. All right, one of which is called like the square minus square case. Looks like this, right? We've actually seen that case a little bit before. So I did some examples over here on the side where we have like x squared minus 49. Those are 2 square numbers. And just as a review, that factors to like x plus 7 and x minus 7. Right, and so it's just something you have to recognize. X squared minus 100, all those are 2 perfect squares, so that factors to like x plus 10 and x minus 10. Okay, so we already kind of know that case, and we're going to learn like a couple new cases today. I'm going out of order here a little bit because I'm gone, but we're going to learn 3 and 4. All right, and so this first one is situation number 3, factor by grouping, and it'll happen when you have 4 terms. In a lot of ways, we already know this. You just group the front 2, pull out a GCF, and group the back 2 and pull out a GCF, right? So hopefully this first one will be pretty straightforward. All right, so here we go with that first situation. I just wanted to review real quick. We already know this because we did it when we had 3 terms, right? And all that was different when we factored with these 3 terms using our long factor was we took and did the 2 times 5 to get 10. And then we found the 2 numbers that multiplied up to 10 and would add up to the middle term 7, which in this case is 2 and 5. So 2 and 5. All right, and so all we did when we did this long factor was we took and we split that 7x into the 2 and the 5. So using these 2 numbers from over here, we did 2 and 5x. All right, and then we had these 4 terms. We kept the other 2 the same. This went down the same. This 5 went down the same. And then we said, hey, we can group together the first 2 and group together the back 2 and just pull out their GCFs. All right, so what this looked like was in the front there, our GCF would be 2x, and the back it would be 5. All right, so those numbers got pulled to the front. Then we had matching x plus 1s, and that became one factor, the x plus 1s, and then whatever was in front, that was the other factor, so in this case 2x plus 5. All right, so we already did this kind of factor by grouping. The only thing that's going to be different is in some ways it's easier because we're actually going to start with 4 terms and then just group them right away and go from there. On your sheet, if you want to find this first question for me, with me, I think it's number 1 on there. So this is the factor by grouping, and we know to do that because it has 4 terms. All right, so we're going to group, and if you want to try and do this, figure out what the GCF of those 2 are, and figure out what the GCF of those 2 are, you could actually stop the video and try and figure it out. All right, so out of the front should be x squared, and out of the back should be negative 3. All right, so if we pull that x squared to the front, we're left with an x plus 2. And if we pull the negative 3, divide it out from these back two, we get an x plus 2. All right, so now we're in business because these two match. That's good. That's one factor, and then take whatever's in front, and that makes the other factor. So x squared minus 3 and x plus 2. All right, so we've essentially broken it apart, factored it apart. And now that we broke it apart, we just set each of these parts to 0 and solve them individually. Okay, so for the one on the left, we're going to have to do a little bit of work. We're going to add and then add 3 to both sides, and then take the square root of both sides to get rid of the square. All right, and the square root of 3 it's a real number. It's not imaginary because it's positive, but it doesn't come out perfectly, so we'll just leave it as plus or minus the square root of 3. All right, and then on the other one, we just subtract 2 from both sides, and so we get an answer of x equals 2. All right, so our three answers are plus or minus square root of 3, and then x equals 2. All right, so I'm going to have you try one more case like this. All right, I think this is number 2 on your sheet, and see if you can solve this by factor by grouping. So I'm going to have you pause the video, and then once you're done, you can resume and check it with me. All right, welcome back. So if you want to check your work here, 4 terms, that's how we know to do this grouping case. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, and so we're going to group the front 2, group the back 2, and do our GCFs. So out of the front 2 will come x squared, and out of the back 2 will come 6. We have matching x plus 2s, that's a good sign. So our 2 factors are going to be the x squared plus 6, we'll group that together, and then the x plus 2s we'll group. Now that it's factored apart, we can just solve both parts by setting them to 0. Okay, so the one on the right is going to be pretty straightforward. That's just going to be an answer of negative 2 when we subtract 2. And then the one on the left, minus 6, and then take the square root of both sides. So this one will have imaginary because we're doing the square root of a negative number. All right, and so that square root of negative 6, we can break off the negative part and make that I. So we have 2 answers, plus or minus square root of 6, with the I on the end for the negative part. All right, so we got 2 imaginary answers and 1 real answer over here. Okay, last one like this. This one I'm going to say is optional. If you feel like you want to see another example of this, you can keep watching the video. If not, you can skip ahead till you see the part that talks about special case number 4. All right, for those of you still with me that want to see this one more time, you could try it on your own again and then see if you can get the right answer, or you can just watch if you want. Only thing that's really different here is we have to minus the 3 first from both sides, right? Now we can group the front 2, group the back 2, and do our GCFs. Right, again, I know to do this because there's 4 terms. That's how I can tell to do this type of factoring. Out of the front should be a 2 and an x squared. Out of the back should be 3. From here, when you take whatever's in front, that's going to be one factor. And then the parts that match, that's going to be another factor. All right, so the 2x squared plus 3 and the x minus 1. And then set the parts to 0 and solve them. All right, so on the right, you just get a single answer of 1. On the left, we got to do a little bit of work, and it's going to get a little weird with decimals there. But you minus 3, divide by 2. Now take the square root. Okay, and it looks like we're going to get some imaginary answers. Right, so if we simplify that a little bit, we'll get plus or minus the square root of 1.5 times I for the imaginary part. And that'll be 2 more answers. Okay. Before I go on to special case 4, I just want to show you real quick. I have the word puzzles for the day here. Hopefully you can see those on your screen. And if you can get all 3 of these right, if you email the answers to all 3 of these to me, I will owe you some candy tomorrow. So just if you can figure out these 3, if you want to take a minute, try and figure it out, send me the answers, earn yourself some candy. All right, back at it. So our second part of the day is a second factoring case, like a new factoring case, and it happens when there's three terms that goes x to the fourth, x squared, and then a constant. Okay, and so how we factor this is really, really similar to the example I have over here in blue. And back in this example, this is just the factor where we can do the quick factor and say we set up two little factors here with x and x, and then we just figure out the numbers that multiply to this -4 and add up to -3. Right, so in this case, it's just -4 and +1. Okay, so that thing factors apart to an x -4 and an x +1. Right, the case over here, our new case, is almost exactly the same thing. The only difference is when we set up our little factors, right, in the situation that we had on the right-hand side, it was an x and x. Now we're just going to have x squared and x squared. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to type this out here quick, but this particular case is going to factor with x squared right there, and then the second little factor similarly will have an x squared, right? That's what gets us the x to the fourth, and then all we have to do is find the two numbers that multiply to -4 and add up to -3. All right, and if we do that, it's actually the same numbers as before. It's a +1 and a -4. Okay, and we can check, like, if we're really freaking out and say, are these things really equal or not, right? Are these two things equal? We know we get the x to the fourth from these two front x squareds, and we know we get a -4 from 1 times -4. And then our middle two terms would be a +1 x squared and a -4 x squared. That's what gets us this -3 x squared in the middle. Okay, so that's just a way of checking to make sure that what we have here is actually equal to what we started with. Okay, now that it's factored apart, we can just set both of those parts to 0. And those are just quadratics, but since they have only x squared, we can keep using our algebra steps. All right, so we will subtract 1 from both sides and add 4 on this one. Now just take our square roots like we've been doing all day of both sides. So square root. And so we get x is plus or minus the square root of -1. And then over here we get x. Oh, I forgot the little plus minus thing there. But it should be a plus or minus square root of 4 on the right-hand side. So we end up with plus or minus the square root of I. That's our definition for I is -1. And plus or minus square root of 2. Okay. So one more question if you want to find this one on your sheet. Again, I would try it on my own first and then pause the video, and then once you have it done, resume it and check your answer. All right, so this one, we're going to start by -36. Okay, and again, hopefully you'll know to factor this case when you see an x to the fourth followed by an x squared followed by a constant, which is what we have here. So we're going to use x squared and x squared, and they just have to multiply up to -36 and add up to this -5. Okay, so you can list your pairs of numbers here, but we're going to need one positive and one negative if it is -36. Right, so it looks like 4 and 9 with the 9 negative will work. So that breaks apart to x squared minus 9 and x squared plus 4. Set both of those parts to 0. Okay, and now use our algebra steps. So we'll add 9 and -4. Take the square root of both sides. So the square root of 9 and square root of -4. The square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. And the square root of -4 is an imaginary number plus or minus 2 imaginary. Right, so we end up with 4 answers to our x to the fourth. Again, this one, look for it when you see this particular pattern. So, in summary, this section is all about factoring, and there's lots of different types of factoring. And the ones we covered today were grouping, when there's 4 terms, and then this second pattern where it goes x to the fourth, x squared, and a constant. This is the homework. Just one quick note that it's kind of longer, so it's not due till Friday. And also you can skip these 10 to 12 for now because we haven't covered that material yet, and you'll be able to do them after Thursday.